All right, how's everybody doing today? My name is Mark Stepp. I am the Chief Innovation Officer here at Realvolve and local guru of workflows. One of the things I love is creating and doing things with workflows and looking at patterns of things. So many times whenever we're looking at the processes that we do on a day-to-day basis, there are things that we do repetitively, and workflows work really well with creating those repetitive items in an automated way. So what I wanted to do today was go over the building blocks, the 8 activity building blocks that make up any kind of workflow you do. There are elements of each one of these in virtually anything that you do. So what we're going to do is just kind of go through each one of these. I put a little quick summary here of the activity workflow elements that we're going to go over. They are the task items, the scheduled appointments, the pre-appointment reminders, the deadline activities, delayed activities, conditional delays, completed activity notifications, and responsible party notifications. So anything, at least in anything that I've come across in workflows that real estate agents do, it falls into one of these 8 categories. So what we're going to do is just kind of cover each one of these and go through them. Now, I've got more of a summary here. I am going to make this presentation available in our Facebook group as well. This is just another quick summary of those same items, kind of what they are and what their benefit is. So once you understand kind of what they are and what their benefit is, you can kind of plug and play any of these elements inside of a workflow at any time. And the nice thing is as you build these together, it's just like Lego blocks. And I really like using the analogy of a Lego block where you can take lots of different Legos. If you were to come to our house, of course, growing up, I've had Legos all my life, probably since 6, and there are, the big cases that you get whenever you want to store stuff, just the storage boxes. I've got 2 huge ones of those completely full. So it takes 2 people to carry each box coming, from downstairs to upstairs. And the kids growing up, they would drive us crazy. Of course, I drove my dad crazy and my mom crazy whenever I was young and going through this. But the beautiful thing about Legos is the ability to create anything that you want. It's just a matter of imagination. You're taking one element, snapping it on, and adding another. And that's really what this is. A workflow is a bunch of activities, and the activities are of these 8 different types. And then you just kind of snap in the ones that you really need or want. So let's go through each one of them and kind of how you deal with them whenever you're trying to build any kind of workflow. So the task item is probably the one that's least used. It's probably I'd almost say the least useful, but it does have a use, and I want to make sure that it's there. It's kind of like one of the little pieces of a Lego. It's there if I need it to fill a need. It's there, but other than that, it's just not as useful as the other ones. But a task item, and a task item is an activity of some sort that does not have a due date, and it does not have any time associated with it if it does have a due date. So what do I mean? Like, if your spouse wanted you to go to the store and get some bread, I mean, you don't necessarily have a time frame for it. It needs to get done. Next time I go to the store, I'll do it. But I don't have a specific need to go at exactly 1:00 p.m., on a given day to go get that bread. It's just something that I need. And that's what a task is. And a task, whenever you look at it, and you go to create it in a workflow, and we're going to show some of these kind of as we once I go through the explanation, these kind of go through some of these that might make a little bit more sense. But whenever you go into your workflow, over here on the right hand side, I've got a little place where the screenshot where you're dealing with the scheduling of an activity in a workflow. You can choose the none option, and it'll do it as a task without a date. Or if you specify a computed date, but you this box here where it would normally be the time frame of this is set for none. In either case, what it does is it can put it on the calendar if you do specify the date, but there's no time, so it's not in this lower section. And the other thing about it, it's not marked as an all-day activity. So if it's not marked as an all-day activity, then it's just like anytime that day I can do it. So it's not not pertinent to a particular time. The main thing that you're going to see, though, is if you use this in Google, whenever we're syncing to Google, a task will not show up normally in the main calendar. And that's because the upper section here on Google Calendar is normally assigned to all-day tasks. And then the time frame, if there's no times assigned to it, then it won't show up in the time. But Google has this option here called reminders. And a reminder, if you've got reminders checked, this little checkbox here, it will show up as a task at the top, just like any other all-day activity. And we do the same thing in Realvolve. Whenever you go, whenever you look at the calendar here, if there's an item that is an all-day activity, it will still show in this list as in the all-day section, unless as long as you've got this show tasks option turned on. So it'll show it there, otherwise it'll take it off. In Google, it automatically, man, my screen here. In Google, my activities will show up on the calendar, but my tasks or elements that don't have all-day activities or aren't marked with a time will show up as a task, and the tasks then will show up here. So you can have either tasks turned on where it just shows it in a list right here as a list of things to do, or you can show it as reminders. So if something needs to be switched and you want to see tasks, you can do it that way. In either case, it's important to realize that if something is not showing up in your Google Calendar, it's probably because you don't have reminders turned on, or you're not showing the tasks. Tasks will only show on this right-hand side if it doesn't have a date or a time. Where if it does have a date but no time, you have to have the reminders option turned on in order to see those. Hope that makes sense. And it's an important distinction, because if you do sync things and you're expecting to see things on your calendar and they're not there, it's typically because you don't have the little reminders option checked. So make sure that you do check that item. So that's the task item. And it's, like I said, very basic. It's just something that will remind you to do something, but it doesn't have necessarily a completion date or time, specifically not time, but it can have a date. The one thing about a task in Google is if you do show the task, and you'll see that over here on the right-hand side, it's got a little checkbox. If you do check them in here, they will complete in Realvolve as well. Where a calendar item in Google doesn't have really a completion date, a completed status of any type. It's just a calendar item. If it goes past that time, Google assumes, which is not a good assumption, assumes that it is completed. All right. Whoa, my goodness. I'm jumping all over the place. Okay, so that's task items. Now, scheduled appointments. This is the one that's probably used the most of all of the workflow activities. This is where whenever you're creating a workflow activity, you're putting in some kind of title at the top, and you can use merge fields and stuff on that. But the main thing on this is that you're creating something in here where it's a computed date and time of some sort. So it can, whenever you say, I want this to be 0 days after the photography date, well, 0 days after is the photography date. So that makes it the scheduled appointment. So anytime you use 0 days after, that is basically the day of, and we want to make sure that it's there. And if you assign the time field for the photography time, the inspection time, the whatever time, these are the actual appointment dates of those critical elements of your workflow. So any kind of anything that has 0 days after, that is a appointment of some sort that has a time, that is the scheduled appointment. Now, the cool thing here is that whenever you're in your record, maybe for your transaction, your listing, and there's a section in there for like closing date or closing time, particularly, if you change either one of those, the closing date or closing time, it knows that, hey, since we're dealing with activities that deal with that time, let's say photography, just use this as the example. Say, for instance, I had my photography time set up on Friday at 2:00, and for whatever reason, the photographer calls, says, hey, we've got to reschedule to 3:00. Well, I can go and I can drag and drop that activity to a different time, or I can go into my property record and change the time in there. And whenever that does that, it automatically changes the activity, and any activities that are based off of that will change as well. So if I say, 1 day after photography date, I want to do something, if for some reason the photography date has to be changed, it will recalculate everything just by dragging the new photography date. It'll adjust everything else for you automatically, which is really cool, but it's really important to help save you time. So you don't have to worry about things getting on your schedule that don't need to be on your schedule. So the way that we deal with this is anytime that's put as 0 days after a given date, a given milestone date, and it also has a time associated with it, in this case, photography time, it's considered an appointment. So realize that. So that's building block number 2. Building block number 3 is basically pre-appointment reminders. So if I want to do some kind of reminder prior to some kind of activity or some kind of date of some sort, that is a pre-appointment reminder, and I want to maybe send a text message or send an email to a recipient of some sort. Maybe send an email to the seller 2 days before the photography date. Okay, this is a pre-appointment reminder. So we had our appointment reminder, or our appointment itself was set for a given date and time. Now, building block number 3 allows us to add a pre-appointment reminder that says, okay, so many days before, I want you to send this text message or email or message of some sort that lets them know that they've got an appointment. So that's number 3. Now, how do you do that? The main thing, there's 3 main things that you have to do to set up a pre-appointment reminder. Number 1, in the with field, whenever you're in an activities, workflow activity area, there is a with option. Who am I doing this appointment with? and you'll go to the party selection and choose from the available party members. What this does then is this pulls from the people tab all the party types that we've got in the people tab, and it will allow you to say, okay, for seller and seller 2, I want to send this reminder. In this case, I'm using seller and seller 2. If there's other party members I want to send it to, absolutely put them in there and it'll send them the reminder as well. The main thing for the scheduling field on this is to say that for a pre-appointment reminder, we want to do it so many days before or so many weeks before, potentially. I mean, you can use any sort of option there for days, weeks, months, or years before. The main key there is the before option, and then whatever date that you want to use as the key date, the milestone part of this, as the calculator. So once we do know our photography date, 2 days prior to that photography date, I want to do what? I want to send an email. Maybe I want to send a text message, whatever. You can have it send automatically, an email, and then just a photography reminder to seller, which is the template that it would have. So in that case, if I have it set for automatically, whenever I come in the morning, it has already done this work for me. If I've got my automations turned on, and maybe at 7 o'clock in the morning, send my emails or send my texts, this type of pre-appointment reminder happens without you even having to do anything, which is awesome because number one, you're not having to remember to do this, and number two, it's doing it for you. So that's the gist of a pre-appointment reminder. So that's number 3. The deadline reminders is almost identical to that. But one of the things that you want to do is making sure that you're preventing deals from falling through. It's not necessarily an appointment, but it is a deadline. But it's basically the same type of thing. So many days before some kind of due date, in this case, a contingency date of some sort. It's not necessarily an appointment like our appointment reminders is, but it is an important date. And in that important date, I want to have some kind of reminder that I want to do. So 5 days before, check on the appraisal or whatever. You can do whatever you want so many days before or whatever. To set that up, it's identical to the other one. In this case, 5 days before financing, the with field, it's more of a to do for yourself, so you don't have to do anything with the with like you were with the pre-appointment reminders. But in this case, you'd still send some kind of text confirmation to yourself, maybe, or something like that. Is the appraisal okay? So you could still do some automation if you wanted to, but definitely it's some kind of something to give you some forewarning before that deadline is due. So that's number 4. Then delayed activities. Whenever we talk about activities that get done, there's a certain like drip campaign, stuff like that. Those are delayed activities. You can do from the listing date 1 day after. So it's the same thing as an appointment. You're just doing it after instead of a before option. So many days after closing date, I want to do whatever, or so many days after listing date, I want to do something. So same process. In the delayed activities, 1 day after listing date. So it's nothing different. We're just doing it instead of a before option here, we're doing it as an after. And the photography in this, so delayed activities, this is one where once I get my photo appointment set up, 1 day after listing, I might coordinate my photos, and then I want to email the photographer. Well, in this case, once I have it listed, then or the listing date, then it will do it 1 day after. And I'm sure that's a great, it really ought to be like a pre-listing or so many days after signed agreement or something like that, because you'd really want it before the listing date itself, probably. At least before you put it in the MLS. So in most cases. But in this case, you could send the email to the photographer, in which case you're already saying, hey, at this street location, here's some directions. Here's, please give me the date and the time, and here's some special instructions. Would you reply back to this? And then that way, whenever they reply back to this with a date and time, you can then plug in the date and time of the photography shoot, in which case then your other workflow activities kick in place. So this is just a building block for saying something that happens after some other date. Very simple. Then there comes conditional delays. Conditional delays is identical, except we're saying 2 days after the completion of an activity in this case. So maybe use this technique to check the results of some event after the main activity has been completed. So once the photography date has been completed, I want to give it 2 days after that completion, and then I want to check on the photos. Where are we at? Did I receive them? If I didn't receive them, maybe I want to send an email or a text message to the photographer. I just want to make sure that I'm keeping on top of those photos, and I'm not waiting for them to get back to me, which may take too long. If I give them some leeway, a couple days, they ought to have it back. For some of you, that may be the same day, maybe whatever, however you want to do this. But the number of days is up to you. But the main thing here is it's after the completion. And so how do we do that? Same type of thing. We give some kind of descriptive title. Do we have the photos back? And we're going to say, in this case, 2 days after, and we choose a special option here instead of a key date field. We're saying after the completion date of some activity that we already have in our workflow. So the one activity that I had shown earlier about photos on a given date, once that photos appointment was scheduled, and once we completed that, then 2 days after that, after the completion of this, then this activity will be given a date. So whenever you go and start this workflow, technically, this activity will not be given a date at all. It will show in the list of activities of things that you still need to do, but there's no date assigned to it. The point at which it gets assigned a date is whenever the activity, this activity, photos with the address on it, which was the activity that we had scheduled appointment right here. This photos, property photo street address was assigned to the photo date and time. Once this activity gets completed, that's when the conditional delay activity kicks in. And it then at that point goes and says, okay, once I've completed this activity, do I have any activities that are based off of the completion? Oh yeah, I do. Do we have the photos back? And it says, okay, based off of this, I need 2 days after this. So I'll schedule this. If I completed it today on Wednesday, this activity will show up on Friday. So that's a conditional delay. And it's very, very useful for making sure things don't fall through the cracks. If you think about all the activities that you do, typically it's a human error, and potentially the human error on somebody that you don't have control over. In this case, the photographer. If it's an outsourced photographer or an inspector or any kind of handyman, you want to make sure, did they get that done? And once the due date has come and gone and it's been completed, then I want to make sure that I follow up with something. So that's just a good way for dealing with that. So that's conditional delays. Then we also have a building block for completed activity notification. And this is really useful for team leaders. Say, for instance, you've got activities that your transaction coordinator needs to do, and they're important activities, and maybe it actually keys something that you need to do after the fact as the team leader. Well, either as a notification or as something that you need to do afterwards, this is the same type of thing. It's so many days after completion, but I'm doing it instead of sending it to an outside source, I'm sending it to maybe one of my team members. So I can notify my team leader, and maybe I just send them a text message. Hey, this activity, whatever it was, has been completed by whomever was supposed to do it, the transaction coordinator, just letting you know. Bam. Okay. We know that that particular activity got done, and we're good. So once it's completed, it's awesome. Now you might have some checks and balances in there where if something is one day after this and they've not completed it, then send a notification too. You might deal with that. But this is just a completed activity notification. The way to do this, say for instance here, we've got verified signed documents, which is one day after the acceptance date. The transaction coordinator is supposed to do that. So what we want to do is say 0 days after the completion. So as soon as the day that it's completed, and what activity are we checking to see if it's completed? And it's the verify signed documents, which is this one. Then 0 days after the completion, so as soon as I complete it, then I want to send this notification. And who am I sending it to? In the with field, that would be one of the party members.
Sorry, did you say that?
A watch kicked off. One of the party members, and you might just select your team member, your team lead, and getting them notified. So super simple to get notified on the completion activities. And this is really, really useful for just making sure people get things done, especially team members that maybe don't get into Realvolve as frequently as they should. And as they complete things, you want to be notified. Definitely, this is a way to get notified. And then responsible party notification. Now, this one is almost the same as that previous one, but it has a little bit different connotation in that this is something that you need to notify somebody to get something done, and maybe they don't get into Realvolve frequently, like a buyer's agent or something like that. If in a team situation, you might have a buyer's agent that they're busy showing properties, making phone calls, stuff like that. They don't spend as much time in the database. We know that. But what you can do is build your workflow to compensate for that. So the way you do a responsible party notification, and it's just basically making sure that activities that need to be completed by other people get done. The problem is you don't necessarily know that they get done unless they have the activity and they need to check it off in there. But it is a notification type piece. So who am I doing this with? Well, if it's my buyer's agent type thing, the buyer's agent, it's sending out automatically. You don't want to have to rely on somebody completing this. You want to send this out automatically, send it as an email. And the template in this case might be something like you name responsible party notification. So whoever I've told it to send to is going to receive this template. And in this template, we give the activity title. So we've got merge fields for the activity that they need to deal with. And a activity title and activity date and time that needs to get done. So on a certain date and time, they need to do certain things, actually create a template that sends that activity to them that gets completed. Does that make sense? So again, going back to your buyer's agent, they don't spend it, they're out in the field, they don't spend a lot of time in the database. At least you can send them an email or send them a text message that says, hey, today's appointment is this, at such and such date and time, make sure you do it. Easy enough. So this is the responsible party notification. And it's just, again, a double check, making sure that those team members and non-team members that are supposed to do something get it done. The whole idea of workflows is making sure that the activities that you need to get done get done. Trainer. I'm going to open up because I think that is the last item on this presentation piece. What I want to do is go in and just make sure that you guys realize where these elements are. I'm going to make this presentation piece available to everybody. And let me come over here. So everything that we've talked about so far today is in the workflow section. So we go into the workflows, and I'm just going to create a new workflow. Continue. And I want to say office hours 2/9/22. In this case, I'm just going to pick a property workflow and create add and add another activity to this workflow. So whenever I click here, shows my activity. Every one of these that I just went over today is dealing basically with this screen right here. We've gone in and we've put in some kind of title. We've we'll probably specify who's the activity assigned to. Typically, especially in a team situation, you're going to either put it to a specific person or to some role that they play, the listing agent, listing coordinator, whatever. But the main thing is that we've dealt with today is the with field. So who am I doing this activity with? Typically for properties and transactions, it defaults to no party member at all. It's stuff for you to do. But if there are things that you need to do with somebody else, you're going to specify that right here. And most of the things that we did were dealing with the party members. When you go into party members, then you can specify the different party member types and assigning them as needed. Once you assign them, then anybody that's assigned here will be the receiver of any kind of action that's done. The other thing that we talked about is the scheduling section. So we went in here into the scheduling section, and we either chose none for tasks, or we've specified a computed date where we've gone through and computed a given date off of a certain milestone date. And there's all kinds of milestone dates in here. If you have a Mac, just to let you guys know, if you're not seeing this little scroll bar, I would advise you to go into your general settings and turn the scroll bar option to on all the time. That way it shows up. Otherwise, if you just use your mouse to scroll up and down, you can do it, or your arrows, you can do it. But it by default, it kind of just comes up with 4 options, and if you're not realizing it scrolls, it might throw you for a loop. And then any activity that doesn't have a time, if it's set for none, then it's considered a task. And again, Google treats tasks differently. But if it's set as all day, or it has an ending, a starting and an ending date, so you can specify a specific date, a specific time range in there. Or if it's a date field, now start date doesn't have a particular time, but for like the listing, actually, no, let's go photography. Back to our photography example. If you choose photography, whenever you click on the down arrow here, there's a photography time. So the three bottom options basically makes it an activity that will show up on your calendar, especially on a Google sync. Whenever it syncs to Google, it'll show up on your calendar. If it's marked as none, it will show up as a task or a reminder in Google, and you got to make sure that you show those options on. If there is something that you're doing and instead of being on a particular date, milestone date, and you've got, this is one thing where I've only got one activity in here, so I can't base anything off of the completion of another activity yet. So let me just do, say on this one, I'm going to say task 1. And I'm going to say 0 days after the start date. Let me just do start date on this. And let me add this. So now I've got one task in my workflow that I need to do. If I add another activity in here, and I come to the scheduled section, and in here I want to do the completion of something. Now, because I do have at least one other activity, I can choose this completion date. And whenever I choose that completion date, it gives me a list of available activities in this workflow that I can choose from, which is my task 1. So in this case, 0 days after the completion of this task 1, this one will be given a date. So once I complete this one, then this activity will be given a date. Maybe I want to say, 2 days after the completion of it, I'll do something. You would never do anything before completion. It doesn't make sense. So it has to be after the completion of whatever date. And then everything else that we talked about was just kind of dealing with actions. What type of actions did we need to do, whether it's an email, a text message, or whatever. So did anybody have any questions about any of those? I know I hit them real quick, and I kind of glazed over some of the settings by not doing them live in here, but some of that can get boring and just make the whole process a lot slower. Any questions?
Mark,
Yes.
one of the things I'm struggling with is figuring out the best way to send guys to my homeowners on their home purchase anniversary date. And so I'm getting the home purchase anniversary dates in there, and I'm setting up a workflow to like a recurring workflow, so it'll be a task every year.
Okay.
Is there a way to automate setting up the workflows for everybody that has that field in there?
So we don't,
versus going into each individual record and starting a workflow.
right. So we don't currently allow you to do mass starting of workflows, primarily because too many agents have gone in there and it's like blasted a bunch of things in there, and everything's due on the same day, and they've got 100 phone calls to make, and that's a real challenge. Now, there is a way of doing it in groups of, I think, like 50 or so through our mobile app. So inside the mobile app, you can start if you're filtering your contacts. So what you could do, and I want to highly recommend that you probably get with one of our support teams before you do this, because it can really mess you up if you're not careful.
Okay.
For the most part, what we do recommend for most people is, as you're going through a closing workflow of some sort, put your anniversary stuff like post closing on that same workflow, or create a separate post closing workflow that uses the closing date of the transaction, and it does everything 1 year after, 2 years after, 3 years after. But in the case of you're just getting into Realvolve and you've got a bunch of people in your database and you want to send past items, and you want to make sure that you're using that anniversary date, there's a few things that you can do. So let me do one thing here first before I get into showing you how to do it. I want to do one more thing here. So let's do create a new workflow, and let's say annual or anniversary probably home anniversary activities. And let's say that we are going to do by the contract or by the contact. So one option that I added to the workflows, that this is more of an advanced option here, is this past activity option. And it's important for you to understand how to use that. And I think we've got a whole nother training in our help section on this. By default, it just says, okay, if I start a workflow and if there's any past due activities, just blast them in there. Just let them go. But here's the problem. If I'm starting this workflow on somebody that closed 5 years ago, and if I have it set to 1 year after, 2 years after, 3 years after, send these emails, he's going to get 5 emails one day. Happy anniversary, year 1. Happy anniversary, year 2, because it was 5 years ago. So that can be a huge problem. You don't want to do that. Depending on how you set up your workflow, you can set it up so that it says, okay, I do have a year 1, and it does say happy first year anniversary, happy second year, happy third year to 10 years, or whatever. If I'm doing that and it's a specific year, I probably want to use the skip creating past dues. It actually skips those past due ones. So if today is the 5th year, it would skip all the years 1 through 4 and just do the 5th one. So that skip past due is real important.
Got it.
Now, if you set your workflow up where it doesn't specify years, but you want them to start at the very beginning, then you can say starts at the next valid annual date. So if my anniversary date is coming up on, let's say it's coming up on June 13th. Kathy and I were married in 87. So on June 13th of 2022, it would create the date for me if I was using an anniversary date. If I'm using a home anniversary date, it would find whatever it is. If it's in the future, it will use it. If it's in the past, like if we just passed it, then it will use the next valid one for the following year. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
So these can be very useful and mandatory in some cases, but it really depends on how you set up your workflow. And that's kind of why I say be very careful, because you don't want to send your emails to past ones that you'll blast them with things that you don't want to blast them with.
Right.
So be very, very careful there. But what you can do, if you get that part set up, the way you want. What you can do is go in and I don't have my mobile. You can go into your mobile section on your mobile phone, go into Realvolve, and then go into clients. And if you have a filtered list, you cannot do this for your full list. It has to be filtered with 50 or less, I believe. And I'm not sure you can actually see it, but up here at the top, let me stop sharing my screen for a second, if I can even see my own screen. Oh, there we go. So, is this okay? Up here at the top of the mobile app. Oh man, I can't even do this. On this other side here, there is a ... button. It goes down. It's 3 dots going down. They're right next to the plus sign. If you've got a filtered list, which there is a little filter icon over here on the side here. If you filter your list and bring it down to maybe a date, maybe a month or something of annual purchases or whatever, maybe you can get it down to everybody that closed in January or everybody that closed in a February or whatever. You can do some filtering, bring it down to a smaller list. Then, based off of having a smaller list, you can click on the little ... button and start a workflow and start it on multiple records so that it does it for multiples. That's really dangerous. Like I said, I would test it. I give you the power, but with great power comes great responsibility. If you guys are Spider-Man fanatics. So that is an option. Otherwise, honestly, I would much rather, I mean, how many clients do you want to go back to, evaluate them? Do I really want to send this to them? If I do, send it manually is my advice to you. I know it'll take some time. If you're doing, 100 transactions a year, that's a lot of starting. But, if you're doing 1 or 2 a month, it's a little bit more manageable. It just depends on where you're at in your business.
Okay.
So
That's
I hope,
Thank you.
I hope that explains it and kind of why we don't do it, because we have run into so many people's like, oh my God, I started this workflow on 1,000 people and it just it wreaks havoc. And then you get in the situation of sending out apology emails to everybody because you messed up.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's that. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Anybody? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming to today's office hours.
Thank you, Mark.
If you have a particular topic you want us to talk about, shoot us a message in Facebook. Would love to make sure that we're hitting your needs. So thought that this was an important one for everybody to realize and know about how easy it is actually to make a workflow once you understand the building blocks. So everybody have a great rest of your week. We will talk to you later.
Okay, Mark, you will be putting this up on Facebook for us to review?
Okay. It takes about an hour or so for the recording to get made, and then I upload that to YouTube, so that we do have some people that are hard of hearing and prefer to close captions, so make sure that that's there as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. Have a great day. Bye.